So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us. Welcome to today's webinar under Guest Talk series. The title of today's webinar is Gas Finance After the Spring Meetings, What the Data and Deals Reveal. My name is Fiza Qureshi. I'm gas campaigner with Big Shift Global, and I will be moderating today's discussion. So today also coincides with Earth Day. It's 22nd of April, which is a movement that reminds us not only of the urgency of the climate crisis, but also of the responsibility of global institutions to align their actions with a just and sustainable future. And it is therefore particularly timely that we are having this conversation today. This session comes at a critical juncture. The recent spring meetings of the World Bank Group and the International Monetary Fund from 13th to 18th April are often positioned as key moments for setting global economic and energy priorities. However, beyond official announcements, it is essential to examine what is actually happening in financial flows, investment pipelines, and market dynamics, particularly when it comes to fossil gas. So, at the same time, escalating geopolitical tensions, including those involving Iran, have exposed the fragility of LNG dependent systems. So, for many import reliant regions, these disruptions are not just temporary shocks, they are structural signals about the risks embedded in fossil fuel dependence. So, today's discussion will therefore move beyond high level commitments and focus on where gas finance is actually flowing, how financial intermediaries are shaping these flows, what macroeconomic signals are influencing energy investment decisions, and what current market trends tells us about the future viability of gas. So I think on a day like Earth Day, this conversation is not just analytical, it is about accountability and about whether current financial and policy choices are truly aligned with the scale of the climate change challenge we face. So over the next 75 minutes, we aim to analyze post-spring meeting signals through real financial and market data. And we will be unpacking how intermediaries channel gas-related investments and understanding how IMF-linked macroeconomic frameworks influence energy choices, examine global gas and LNG trends and associated risks, and identify key gaps in transparency and accountability. We are joined by an excellent panel having Marjorie, finance campaigner at Recourse, who will focus on financial intermediaries and how gas investments are structured and obscured. Robert Rosansky, project manager at Global Energy Monitor, who will provide a data-driven overview of global gas and LNG market trends as key highlights from their recent report, and Federico Cibaja, IMF lead at Recourse, who will unpack how macroeconomic policies and IMF programs shape energy investment pathways. So, a few quick notes before we begin. This is a meeting format session, so we encourage active participation from our participants and audience. So please share your questions in the chat throughout the discussion. We will have a dedicated Q&A segment toward the end. So let's begin our discussion. To set the stage, I would like to start with a framing question for all our speakers, focusing on what has actually changed following the spring meetings. So I will first invite Robert to share his initial reflections with a brief 2-minute response. Robert, from your perspective and respective areas of expertise, what do you think? What are the most important signals emerging after the spring meetings, particularly in relation to energy and gas?
Sure. Thanks, Fiza. And thanks, everyone. Yeah, I think a dominant theme coming out of the meetings was energy security. As you had alluded to a little bit in your opening remarks, yeah, I mean, we're currently in a crisis that is reminiscent of Ukraine and potentially worse. Spot prices for LNG are once again skyrocketing and making the fuel unaffordable for many importers, and forcing countries to take emergency steps to adapt. Um, and these events have really revealed, again, how fragile our energy and economic systems are, tied to fossil fuel markets, and that they can be uh, somewhat easily disrupted by individual countries taking action. Um, yeah, I think there also was a recognition that the world is more geopolitically fractured in the past, and that these effects are being felt with less of an ability to respond to energy crisis like this one. And broadly, to whatever extent the energy crisis after Ukraine had shaken confidence in the viability of gas and LNG, especially as being energy secure and affordable, this crisis could further drive countries that consume LNG away from the fuel. A key takeaway ought to be that real energy security should come through financing and support for more rapidly deployable, affordable, and domestic energy sources such as renewables with storage. Thanks. And yeah, looking forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thanks, Robert. So now coming towards Marge. So Marge, to what extent do these signals represent real shifts in direction versus continuity in existing practices?
Thanks, Pisa, and thanks, Rob, for giving that framing earlier. No, and indeed, and this crisis has shown us that it is time for us to double down on renewable energy investments and making sure that we don't suffer the same crisis in the future. No, but from what I've observed from the responses of the at least the multilateral development banks, the World Bank coming from these spring meetings, and even the other multilateral development banks such as the ADB, perhaps is that I don't see a shift in their current practices. And in fact, I see one continuity with danger into opening up for more fossil fuel financing. I'm saying this because for once, coming from the spring meetings, we've observed, I think, I'm not sure if everybody is familiar here, but the one of the U.S. representatives was highly spoken or openly speaking about demolishing the World Bank's mandate on climate and instead putting more oil and gas and even coal projects in the pipeline. So we've seen the other EDs or other bank shareholders kind of push back on that, but we still right now we still don't know what will happen if the United States keep pushing this agenda around. And we've also seen their response. No, the World Bank is offering emergency financing for that will support not only imports for food or making borrowing more less expensive, but those emergency financing will also support more fossil fuel imports. The ADB is also doing that. Maybe I can share more on that later. But right now, there is this need for us, civil society and communities, to really push back on this continuing practice with the danger of opening up for more fossil fuels to prevent future crises like this. That's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marge. Yes, it's really very much alarming that the World Bank, ADB, all the main MDBs, they are really backsliding on these climate commitments. So it's really alarming. So, Fedi, coming towards you, are financial flows and policy signals aligning with stated climate commitments or diverging?
Hi everyone, and thank you Lisa, and thank you for the invitation also. I think last week there was lots of discussions around energy security, which seems to be like this new framing under which climate is being discussed, that I think among us, civil society is worth discussing what are the limitations of this approach, because I think in many countries we're seeing the tapping into fossil fuel reserves in the name of energy security. Well, we hear lots from other climate ambitious countries like the Europeans that that's a framing. I think I would challenge to what extent we should go that avenue, and I think it's worth continue countries and governments accountable for what they committed to under the Paris Agreement. I had lots more to say, but I think I'll leave it for the next segment.
Thanks, Freddy. Thanks. So let's move towards the next segment and let's deep dive what you have set the stage. So coming to you, March, again, what you have said in this introductory remarks. So following the spring meetings, emphasis on climate alignment and private sector mobilization at the same time. So what you say that how are financial intermediaries continuing to structure and channel gas related investments?
I hope my screen can be seen. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you, Pisa, for that question. But maybe before I go into the financial intermediary investments, uh,
Sorry, your voice is little low. So can you
oh,
be closer
sorry,
to the
uh,
speaker?
I
Yeah,
have a
thanks.
I have a cold actually, so apologies. let me let me try to speak louder. All right,
Thanks.
thank you. So before I go into the financial intermediary lending and how it still channels fossil gas, maybe I can briefly discuss how does fossil gas looks like in the World Bank Group's financing right now. So as mentioned earlier, there's still continued pushback on climate during the spring meetings. It's a very strong pushback on climate, I guess, no? And gas is still an ongoing battle actually. So the graph on the right or left side shows how much the World Bank Group has given to gas, oil and gas from 2017 to 2024. I'm sorry, that's the up and that's how that's the only available data right now until 2024. But during the opening of 2026, we were greeted by new projects by the IFC on gas. So we have the pending or proposed projects on building or supporting Sahara LPG and Senegal LNG projects. The Basra Gas Company project was approved in January 2026. And then there are new proposed MEGA direct guarantees for a pipeline in a gas pipeline in Romania. And from what I've seen, also how the portfolio moves is that there are dangerous moves towards nuclear coming from the energy policy review of the ADB and also the energy direction policy of the World Bank. And it looks like the AIIB might go into nuclear too. And also there are also moves towards funding more projects, either direct projects or FI, financial intermediary projects on critical minerals. So that's how the state of direct financing looks like roughly. But uh, for the indirect financing, so how does this look like, or how does indirect financing or financial intermediaries still direct gas finance or finance towards gas? Has been uh, a very I think long battle with the MDBs that we have had with them, and we are still having with them to be more transparent, to be more to declare what their financial intermediaries are funding, but still there is a lot more improvement on that, especially in this coming performance standards review and review of the access to information of the IFC. But for the purpose of this discussion, so for the World Bank Group, at least, and for the IFC, we have their financial intermediary lending, which is more than 50% of their portfolios. And with the other MDBs, it's a growing proportion of their own portfolios. But at least with the IFC, it's more than 50%. And it usually happens through loans and bonds, which is majority of their financial intermediary portfolio. But what I have been seeing in my monitoring is that the bank is also going into equity investments, not just in banks, but in funds that are managed by private equity companies. And they're also going into securitization projects, which is coming, having a basket of different projects and then combining them and issuing bonds and securities to investors, which makes it more difficult to track. So all of these instruments are very opaque, and even the IFCs and the CAOs studies say that their ring fencing or the protection of the IFC or the World Bank's money from being used for gas projects is not that effective. And we have been told that the existing policy of the World Bank, which is not to invest in upstream oil and gas, is not applicable through financial intermediaries. So yes, the IFC, as far as we know, the IFC and the World Bank Group's financial intermediaries are still free to invest in upstream oil and gas. And then there are also these things called guarantees, which either de-risk or make costs for borrowers lower. So these can be guarantees for fossil fuel imports, like the one that's issued to Bangladesh last year, which helps them import more LNG for their energy, quote unquote, security. And then you have these trade finance facilities that are being created by MIGA, either in partnership with IFC and also with the EBRD or standalone, which are not really ring fenced, which are not protected from being used to import not only fossil fuels, but also materials for the construction of oil and gas infrastructure. And then you have these capital optimization guarantees, which are basically guarantees issued by MIGA to banks like ABSA, Santander, to make them for them to be legally compliant in their host countries' laws, so that they can operate. For example, Santander in Argentina has MIGA's capital optimization guarantees. Well, in fact, Santander has a lot of support that goes into the large-scale oil and gas exploration in Vaca Muerta, extraction in Vaca Muerta, and also in the San Matias Gulf, which has violated lots of environmental laws, violated indigenous people's rights, and also has been causing a lot of environmental damage in those two areas. So, yep, I will stop at this, but right now, as I've mentioned earlier, I think there's in this kind of crisis, there really should be a really push for the MDBs to shift their financing, not only their direct financing, but also their indirect financing, make sure that it supports the renewable energy transition for us to not suffer further crises like this one. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Marge. Very quickly, follow-up question that how effective are existing accountability mechanisms in addressing these gaps? Very quickly.
Very quickly, I would say there is very much room for improvement, without saying that they're not effective, because there are, when you see the CAO's website, there are a lot of complaints on actually FI lending by the IFC. And we have ongoing cases that we have recourse and partners have filed with them. So we say that although there has been improvements in the past, there is a lot room for improvement, and we are a bit worried about that right now because of the upcoming merger of the accountability mechanisms of the World Bank, wherein the private sector and the public sector lending accountability mechanisms will be merged into one, and there might be dangers of diluting the rights of complainants and also lowering the standards for that. Thanks, Pisa.
Thanks, Marge. So, moving towards Federico. So, Fedi, in light of the spring meetings discussions on macroeconomic stability and fiscal reform, how are IMF programs shaping energy investment decisions, particularly regarding gas?
Yes, thanks, Lisa. I think it's worth mentioning, given I would like to start with the context on which the IMF is going through. I think especially related to the debt crisis, countries are still, had barely recovered from the shocks after COVID, after the war in Ukraine, after the inflation and increase in interest rates, and are now seeing again another shock after years of having been delaying investments in health, in education, in infrastructure, and in energy in order to service debt. And I think that's where one would expect something different out of a multilateral institution that has international macroeconomic stability at its mandates, when we're currently seeing what are the consequences of delaying those investments. I think something interesting about the current discussions is that there seems to be agreement around the failed approach to energy, that it was too little too late on the energy transition, that we need to scale it up now. But the IMF doesn't seem to be really there, because the recommendations to countries that are facing, of course, a more shock-prone world is for them to do more austerity and to save up, to build up fiscal buffers and to be protected from more crises, rather than ensuring that they have the right fiscal space to be more resilient and to invest in health, education, energy, climate needs. That, of course, happens in a context where advanced economies and lower middle-income countries do not have the same tools to respond to the crisis. Given that, for example, right now, if we see an increase in inflation in the next few months in the global north, then global north countries will increase their interest rates. And that will mean that borrowing for global south countries will just become more expensive due to decisions made in global north capitals on decisions over which global south countries had no say at all. And that's where the response of the IMF, also with the World Bank, through this, they came up with this three-pillar approach, which relies, in order to respond to the debt crisis, they rely on more IFI financing, and also on more structural reforms at the domestic level. And these structural reforms, in general, are about reducing the size, reducing state capacities, reducing fiscal space. And when it's related to climate and to energy, is mostly related to markets-based incentives, which are not necessarily bad, but for sure by themselves will not take us where we need. And this is what we're seeing in countries in Southern Asia, like in Pakistan, where the IMF has been actively ensuring that the countries do not go wild on providing energy subsidies. And I think that's where we have a role as civil society to have these somehow difficult discussions on how to navigate the trade-offs between ensuring vulnerable populations have access to energy and the energy transition at the same time. But that's where, for sure, we need public finance and fiscal space for investments in renewables. Just making fossil fuel-based energy more expensive won't lead to a just energy transition. And that seems to be the approach from the international financial institutions, that keep the prices up in order for energy imports not to be too high. But then again, like if we subsidize fossil fuel consumption, we will just be benefiting the fossil fuel producers, and that wouldn't be just either. And so it's quite it's quite complicated, I think. And I think lastly to mention that right now, I mean, the IMF is undergoing two of its most important policy reviews. The one is the review of program design and conditionalities. The other one is a surveillance review. And for this first process, the IMF actively decided to have the IMF has a climate finance instrument, which is a resilience and sustainability trust, and they decided to have those discussions on the review of its lending mechanism separated. So they will first review their traditional lending, and then in a few years they will review this instrument that they've had since 2022. The issue with this decision is that given that we're going to have two isolated discussions, the one that is going to be held right now won't discuss climate at all, won't discuss long-term impacts and long-term implications of IMF programs at all, which of course it's something extremely frustrating and extremely disappointing in this world where policymakers are just talking lots about resilience and the need for more resilience economies. Well, actually, if we're not even mentioning resilience and not even mentioning climate in the policy review where we decide how is it that IMF programs are designed, in a world where countries will go even more to the IMF, then this is extremely problematic, and it's of course at odds with the responsibilities and obligations IMF member countries have under the Paris Agreement. So let's remember that vis-a-vis MTBs, the IMF has never has never undergone a process of Paris alignment. I mean, we may have issues with how is it that these Paris alignment methodologies went for the MDBs, but the IMF didn't even have the discussion. So that's where, I mean, the people we talk to say this will happen in the next review of conditionalities and program design, but the last one was 7 years ago. So what they're implying is that maybe only in 2033 we'll start discussing how IMF programs can deliver on the Paris Agreement. And that's extremely concerning.
Yeah, thanks, Fedi, for these insightful sharings. And yes, it is, deeply concerning. So let's see, we will further discuss it in our Q&A and the feedback section. So I would request all the participants and audience, please feel free to post your questions in the chat, or it's not just the question and answer session, but you can share your insights, comments, feedback, anything. So you can even just raise the hands in that section, and then we will allow you to come forward, and you can also share your insights, because this is what good discussion, and we really want to generate a good discourse over all these issues. So now coming towards Robert Rosansky on the market reality check and LNG and gas trends. So coming towards you, Robert, in the context of spring meetings narratives around energy security and stability, and especially the recent report your organization has launched, what do current global gas and LNG trends actually tells us?
Sure. Thanks for that. I will share my screen now. Okay, that coming through all right for everyone? Great. Yeah, so I am with Global Energy Monitor. We compile data sets on energy infrastructure and other data relevant to the energy transition. Put out analyses, and I'll be highlighting a couple of key trends that we've seen. Yeah, starting here. One that gas power growth is poised to surge. Two, that LNG markets are approaching oversupply, or at least were approaching oversupply, although this may now be delayed by the energy crisis from Iran. And three, that gas development faces growing risks on multiple fronts. So here is some of our data showing on the left where gas power plants are in development, very much led by Asia and the United States, with the United States, China, and Vietnam being the countries that have the most gas power in planning. And on the right, a chart showing capacity that has come online over the past 6 years and projected capacity that could be added at various stages of development. Capacity in construction is highly likely to be built. Capacity that's announced, less so. Global LNG markets were headed for oversupply. So yeah, they're I guess including Qatar's projects, which are now facing some difficulties. Um, Global LNG export capacity was expected to increase by at least 50% by 2031. About half of this come from the United States, a significant portion from Qatar's expansions at the Ras Laffan facility. Although this has now been, yeah, thrown somewhat into question. Um, yeah, a fifth of the world's LNG is cut off through the Strait of Hormuz. About a fifth of Qatar's capacity is down. It's damaged and won't be repaired for about 5 years. And it's 64 million ton per annum expansion, which would have close to doubled its capacity, is probably going to be delayed. So I've seen research from Seb Kennedy with Energy Flux, who has suggested that in one scenario, if the Strait of Hormuz is closed until September, markets might not actually be balanced until very late in the year 2028. So yeah, this could be a crisis that will go on for some time, in part because of the time it'll take to sort of refill the gas supplies that are currently being lost by importers. And the next slide, um, I wanted to also plug our global gas finance tracker. Um, this is a tracker that looks at project finance transactions in 13 Asian countries and Canada, Mexico, and Australia. We're hoping to expand it more in the future as well. This is just a snapshot of what some of the data looks like. You can pick a country in the dashboard, see how much total financing we've found, and identify some of the top financiers. It is a relatively small slice of the total financing pie because it's just known project finance, but it does give some insights, including that we're seeing in the 13 Asian countries, intra-country and intra-region project financing is more prevalent than traditional Western financing as of this year and last year. For instance, Japanese, Chinese, and South Korean funding sources are more prevalent in Southeast Asia. And we're also seeing that project and investment timelines appear to be longer, that projects aren't reaching final investment decisions as quickly as they might have in the past, even where there's already startup equity in place. And looking at our LNG terminal timeline data, if we look at how long it takes for projects to go from proposal to construction, which is sort of a proxy for financial investment decision that we have more broadly across the data set. Pre-Ukraine, 2018 to 2020, it took about 2 to 3 years for projects to move from proposal to construction. A slew of projects were enacted very quickly, immediately after the Ukraine energy crisis. So it took only about 0 to 1 years to bring these projects toward construction. And now it is a bit longer, 3 to 5 years over the past couple of years. Yeah, and then new gas developments are facing growing risks, including fallout from the US-Iran war and the energy crisis, high failure rates among Asian LNG projects, the gas turbine shortage, and lengthening oil and gas field development times. And so I'll really quickly spotlight just a couple of trends that we've identified around these. So firstly, I mean, this is obviously all pretty new and evolving, but there does seem to be a shift in the environment around how gas and LNG are being seen thus far, and how energy generation is responding in different countries. Um, in this headline in the top left from the Wall Street Journal, this story speaks a little bit to how even LNG exporters think that the current situation is bad news because while it is driving high profits at the moment, there's a recognition that it could ultimately depress gas demand in the future. Research from Korea, with the headline in the lower left, has found that global fossil generation fell after the Hormuz closure, and that in most countries it has been gas generation has been replaced with solar and wind rather than coal. Um, and we are seeing also a couple of projects, gas projects, having already been canceled these past couple of weeks, including in the lower right. There's a Vietnamese project sponsored by Vingroup, which was scrapped in favor of renewables. LNG terminal project failure rates are higher in two key markets, South and Southeast Asia. We wrote about this a little bit in our recent report because a lot of the demand growth narrative, especially relied on by the LNG exporting industry, is predicated on these regions having very strong demand growth for gas and LNG. But we are seeing also that uh, a relatively high share of projects that are proposed in these regions don't actually come to fruition. So in this chart, you can see capacity in construction, capacity proposed, and capacity shelved and canceled, kind of showing the different scales among these uh, different status types. And we have found that between South and Southeast Asia, about 2 to 3 times as much import capacity was shelved or canceled within the past 5 years as was brought online. Um, so it suggests that yeah, demand growth narratives may be a little overinflated. And this was sort of the picture before Iran, so that may be changing even now. Yeah, and then last two, uh, the gas turbine shortage remains an issue for prospective power plant projects. Um, the gas turbine shortage is delaying projects, increasing costs, and isn't expected to be resolved until the end of the decade, potentially. And we see among the power plants we've surveyed that about two-thirds of gas projects in development haven't announced a turbine manufacturer, suggesting that they may not have a clear path to actually being built, at least in the near term. And then last, um, whereas domestic gas production is being considered by many governments as a solution to high LNG prices and dwindling domestic production, we have seen that the time it takes to develop oil and gas fields has tripled to 15 years from 5 years about 50 years ago, with sort of the lower hanging fruit, easier to develop fields were first developed. And fields today are a little bit more complicated and yeah, therefore take longer and are more expensive as well. Yeah, and then just one more figure to put this all in perspective. Um, to the extent that new gas or LNG projects that are built could become stranded assets if they are, unaffordable to operate and not used to the end of their financial lifetimes. There are $156 billion in potential investments in LNG import infrastructure that are at risk of becoming stranded assets. Yeah, that's all I've got. Contact info here, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rob, and thanks all the speakers. So now we are opening the floor. There are several interesting questions coming in the chat as well. And feel free to even mean all the audiences. So feel free to even mean share your insights as well. Fran has also asked the question regarding the Pakistan. So our speakers, as well as the friends in the audience, they can also comment on from Pakistan. They can also comment on those questions as well. So we have first Mamadou. Mamadou, do you want to comment? If you have any question or insight to share, first Mamadou. Your speaker is not on. Then we have Fran.
Yes, hello. Thank you for a really amazing. Oh, is that Mamadou coming in? Yeah, I'll let him speak first.
Sorry, Mamadou, we can't hear you clearly. Very sorry, Mamadou, we can't really hear your voice. Yes, if you can type in the chat. So sorry, Fran, please continue.
Yeah, thank you so much for that update. It's very revealing and really helpful to have that kind of fresh perspective on what's happening now at the World Bank and IMF. So I was just interested to know a little bit if there's any recognition by the bank or the fund about the fossil fuel debt trap, in the sense that debt itself is leading countries into having to exploit more and more fossil fuels because it's the easiest way for them to get reserves to pay off their debt.
Yeah, thank you, Fran. So anyone from the speakers, Marge and Freddy? Yeah, Freddy.
Yeah, lovely to see you, Fran. I think, I mean, there is a recognition, but the recognition doesn't go to the extent to which they will do what actually is needed to be done around it, because even though they recognize, at least in the case of the IMF, they recognize there's some relation, they say that at the end of the day, it's a question of trade-offs, and countries need to ensure macroeconomic stability and repay debts in order to have the fiscal space that is needed in order to lead just energy transitions. So that's how they twist the arguments. I think also in the case, it's tricky sometimes, because in the case of, that's mostly in the case of exporters, but in the case of importers, what they would argue also sometimes is that, okay, it's true that fossil fuel dependency on the import side is extremely volatile and expensive. So you should just make energy prices more costly and privatize energy companies, which of course won't lead us to where we would like to be. But I think it's a question of nuances, because these institutions have been proven to be quite savvy in how to use new narratives from civil society to justify and legitimize what they're saying. But still, I mean, I think it's not something necessarily negative. It does allow for some openings, but it does give us more homework.
Yeah, and Marge, would you like to respond?
No, I think Fred really covered it very well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So let's move ahead. Mamadou, you have also entered with your another account. Would you like to come in again? If you can turn off your video so that we can hear your voice clearly.
Okay.
Yeah.
You hear me? Is it okay?
Yes, now a little bit better.
Have you
No.
any comment to just so I the presentation and I see
Extremely sorry, Mamadou. Extremely sorry. We can't hear your voice clearly. So moving forward, and yeah, there is another question on the re-expansion in Pakistan, and Majid wants to respond that. So Majid, please come in. Majid Bilal.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, Majid.
Hi, Fiza. Hi, Fran. Wonderful question. Thank you for it. So I will just have a go at it. So as you might,
If you can read the question as well.
okay. So the question from Fran was, she would like to hear a bit of Pakistan's RE expansion, and if this has helped to create a buffer zone against the current gas crisis. Also, how has this interplayed with the LNG oversupply in Pakistan, and what this has meant in the context of the closure that we have of the Strait of Hormuz. Uh, so I would like to keep it short, to just jump back to 2018, 2019. In Pakistan, we saw very expensive electricity, partly because it was being generated through our LNG, partly because the imported fuels were getting expensive, and a common consumer was affected in daily life in two primary ways, and then there were others. Number one, the availability of power being unreliable and expensive, and number two, the use of fuel or gasoline in the automotive sector. The automotive sector was not really impacted back in the 2018 as such, as far as the consumers were concerned. But because the power got so expensive, we saw an explosion of solar panels in Pakistan. In the next 5 years, we saw close to 45 to 50 gigawatts of solar panels imported in Pakistan. Currently, as far as installations go, around 7% or 7,000 megawatts solar panels in Pakistan are connected on grid, while another 12,000 or so megawatts are off grid. So we've got around 20,000 megawatts of solar panel installed. This is close to 50% of Pakistan's entire, uh, or more than 50% of our entire energy needs. Now, this led to people using less and less gas. Domestically, we were losing our reserves and we started importing LNG, but now people started using less of gas because we had a very cheap and reliable source of energy in the solar panels or the solar electricity. To increase demand, the government actually allowed LNG use in the domestic sector, which was very expensive, and people have still gone for it because of our historical dependence on LNG, or we grew up with gas, but its use has been less because people have shifted to solar to a large extent. And now, because the government was becoming a bit nervous because of the mass adoption of solar panels and our grid wasn't keeping up with it, they have now removed subsidies from the solar panels. They've now put up a tax on solar panels. So solar panels that cost, let's say last year, cost around 18,000 rupees per panel has gone up to close to 30,000 rupees as of yesterday. So that is the jump we've seen so far. Because we have got around 50% or over that of our power coming from the solar panels. So the impact of this current crisis, at least in domestic use, has not been too severe. On the grid level, on the country level, yes, we have seen electricity outages, etc. But for a domestic user, this has not been the worst case scenario that we could have possibly felt. This, however, has now become as the launching point for EVs in Pakistan. We've been hearing a lot about EVs. Just like 2018-19, we had very unreliable, expensive electricity. It was the jumping point or the starting point for solar adoption. This is now acting as the starting point for EV adoption with uh, reports. We are trying to verify them that close to 200% or over. That is the increase in sales of EVs since this war in Iran has started. So this is just a brief overview of how things are playing out in Pakistan.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Majid, for this insightful sharing. And it's really very interesting case, I must say. So anyone else from our speakers would like to add something on this? Okay. So let's move ahead. We have another question from Hussein. Hussein, can you comment? Or anything else, friend, would you like to comment on it, what the Majid has shared?
No,
Have you?
I just think it's really interesting, and I think it's a really interesting example of how distributed renewable energy can actually help to support communities and individuals in a crisis like this. And I think it's really important, but I also want to understand how that has impacted the LNG market and how that's negatively impacted Pakistan as well. But that's a really good starting point. Thank you, Majid.
Thank you. And Zubair has also shared in the chat that due to solar rush, Pakistan saved $12 billion of fossil fuel imports since 2018 till now. So, Hussein, would you like to come in?
Yes,
And
thank you, Fiza. Can you hear me?
yes, Hussein.
Okay, thank you. So my question is also connected with the friend's question and also the response provided by the Dr. Majid, because the last question of the friend was that how it has impacted on the LNG. So actually, it has impacted on the LNG that most of the consumers, they have one side left from the left to grid and transition to the rooftop solar. So due to that, the uh, RLNG crisis has started in Pakistan, because it was already agreed by with some of the parties by the government of Pakistan. That's why now they have previously there was a moratorium on the domestic gas consumption. So now the LNG has shifted from power sector to the domestic sectors for the the other purposes. So it has impacted the RLNG. So similarly, my question is that what will be the long term impacts of current crisis on fossil fuel industry, because relying on imported fossil fuel has severely impacted on the energy security, especially RLNG reliance in the case of Pakistan and other countries, and everyone is deliberating on transitioning to local and cheaper resources, because two prominent leaders from Pakistan, one the former Prime Minister Shahid Khaqan Abbasi, who actually has signed the RLNG agreements in 2017 when he was the Prime Minister. So he said now that RLNG is not feasible in Pakistan. So at least Pakistan should think about how to transition the 18% RLNG capacity to the other renewable energy sources of Pakistan to improve the energy security of Pakistan. So I think this is one of the question which everyone is deliberating in Pakistan. So my question was that how will this crisis will impact to RLNG business in coming future? Thank you. your mic is
Oh,
off.
sorry. I'm sorry. So thank you very much, Hussein, for your insights and the question at the same time. So, Robert, would you like to come in and respond?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that I think again we could see real reputational harm to LNG with this second energy crisis in just a few years. Um, and yeah, I mean the costs and timelines for developing these terminals that are and gas plants are increasing. I think these projects could get farther and farther out of reach to the point where they are, yeah, even less appealing compared to alternatives, whether that is uh, renewables or coal or domestic gas. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think Pakistan was also an example of a government that took a clear policy shift away from LNG in response to the last gas crisis. And I think we could see similar shifts in other countries appearing. Yeah, and then just I think sort of again like the global LNG demand growth narrative among exporters and importers, a lot of it comes from the fact that there's just so many projects on the table right now. I don't remember the latest, but there could be enough projects proposed to double or triple import and export capacity existing out there. Um, but yeah, the reality is a lot of these plans are less firm than they appear. Um, uh, LNG is new projects are proceeding strongly in some parts of the world, like the United States very recently, and Europe over the past couple of years. But otherwise, progress has been uneven. So I think we may not see things materialize as much as it might appear to if you're just looking at um, everything that's out there.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. And there is also another quick message for you that if the reason there aren't sufficient turbines for LNG power plants is because private engineering companies are moving away from fossil fuels. Sorry, you are on mute, Rob.
Sorry about that. It's a good question. It's not as much my area since I don't focus as much on power plants, but my understanding is just that the infrastructure to manufacture these turbines is it's concentrated mostly among three companies. It's fairly specialized. Um, they take a lot of cost and expertise to build, and just that demand for turbines has really accelerated due to growing electricity demand around the world, and now more recently, sort of the AI boom or bubble, and it's just outpaced the ability to manufacture these turbines, and that's where it comes from.
Thanks. Shahid Jilani. Shahid, would you like to comment? Shahid is our trend journalist under our National Press Panel initiative. Shahid, would you like to comment?
Yes. I just want to know that K Electric, which is a power supply company supplying electricity to Karachi, Pakistan's largest city, is using more than 80% share in its energy mix from LNG. And after these crises, the Middle East war, LNG supply is stopped to Pakistan, and we are facing long hours of load shedding. My question is that what is the quick or short-term solution for the people of mostly for Karachi, where we don't have rooftops on every buildings because of people are living in apartments and flats. So what is the quick and short-term solution for people of Karachi?
Very tricky question. Anyone would like to respond?
Yes, I think it's Shahid's question is from the Indus Consortium, so that's why I'm coming to respond the Shahid. Yes, Shahid, that's true that mostly the 80% capacity of the K electricity is on the RLNG. That's why Karachi is facing a lot of issue of electricity shortages. I think the recently government has also, provided the local gas to the um, uh, for the construction for the production of the electricity to the to KE. But beside that, I think the solution will be the storage, because if there will be a storage uh, provided to the Jampir wind corridor, it can benefit to the K electricity at the time of emergencies, and especially when there is an electricity shortfall in the KE area. It can be facilitated to provide the capacity to run the power plants on one on the gas and other to utilize that storage capacity. Yeah, so I think it will be one of the solution, but definitely it is creating one of the question that relying on the RLNG is neither providing the energy security and nor it is a cheap. So that's why we have to go to the re-solutions like the wind and the solar in Karachi.
Thanks, Hussein, for this specific response. So there are some friends from the Africa region, if they would also like to come in and if they have any comments and sharings. So please come in. Kenneth is here, Satoko, Mati, Rangel. So you all are welcome. You can come in, you can share your insights, you can put your questions. So now moving towards the conclusion. So very quickly, now I would again ask our speakers just one concluding remark on this whole debate and in the perspective of the World Bank Springs. So, very quickly, the concluding remarks from March.
Thanks, Visa. So to conclude, and also to, to a bit of a summary, so this war has really showed that relying on oil and gas, especially imported oil and gas, exposes a lot of countries, especially developing countries, to a lot of economic hardships, exposing their populations to economic hardships, as well as environmental harms. So I think now this is the time for the World Bank to push more for not only the World Bank, but also the other MDBs to look at their policies and really have a Paris-aligned 1.5 agreement, Paris-aligned energy policies, and really support the just transition to renewable energy. Otherwise, we will repeat this case over and over again if we don't learn from the lessons of the day. Thank you.
Thanks, Marge. Now over to Robert.
Sure. I think, I think that again, just this crisis has exposed risks that were already sort of underlying and even in the past evident in fossil fuel systems and imported gas, especially. And would hope that the World Bank and other MDBs would, better align their policies with a more secure and affordable future for countries relying currently on gas.
Thanks. Thank you. And Fedi?
Yes, thanks, Visa. The main concluding remark will be that if the IMF is serious about macroeconomic stability, then it should support a just energy transition that allows countries not to depend on volatile fossil fuel prices.
Thanks, Fedi. Thank you very much. And now for the overall concluding remarks, I would like to request Rajneesh Bhui, Raj, if you can come in and give our overall concluding remarks for today's webinar.
Thanks a lot, Fiza, and good morning, afternoon, and evening. I think Marge is in the evening time zone right now. It's pretty early for me, so apologies, I won't switch on my camera, but thank you to Fiza, the Big Shift, and I think the brilliant speakers. And I was just going to say, the first thing is just to add the African perspective from the World Bank before I come to concluding remarks, is just to say, follow up on the IFC LNG case in Senegal and the Sahara project. None of the board members was aware of it. So currently it's still at investment decision level, which means we can get ahead of interaction on it, engagement on it. And while just leaving from the Springs, the CSO liaison office had reached out to Karabo from PowerShift, to see if there can be wider engagement on those projects. So I think we have, I think from a perspective of CSO's engagement with the bank and ensuring, we're getting ahead of them, especially for projects that, are being financed, they are listening. It's riled them up, and I think this was one of those, those exemplary cases. It's very good to hear that none of the board members have heard of it, so it means it's still sitting with, management. And we did request most of the EDs to ensure if they do hear anything further on it, we want to engage on that and ensure that there's in-country representation, especially from civil society, that can talk about the effects of this on them. And I was also going to say one more thing that is a bit challenging right now is, as much as the bank and many of the shareholders from the European constituencies are saying, they are still holding the line on, climate finance and ensuring that there's an extension of the CCAP. Their position on gas hasn't necessarily changed. And many of the European constituencies, continuously saying that they want to ensure there's no upstream financing on gas. But when it comes to midstream and downstream, I think the position remains the same that we've heard up to now, that especially a lot of African countries are demanding for it. So when it becomes client demanded, then the bank evaluates it based on whether it's a least cost option. That was what they were saying up to now. Just to say, there's a newest edition of terminology, emissions coefficiency. That's exactly what they're now saying that they're going to be using to determine whether gas projects should be financed. That, for example, the case of IFC in Senegal, where they're changing heavy oil into a gas pipeline, because heavy oil is the emissions coefficiency of heavy oil, is much higher, and the greenhouse gas emissions are much higher. And for fossil gas, it's much lower. Then that's the case for it. So that might be the newest sort of false solution, or false narrative that they're using to perhaps push, or countries are pushing to get gas financing. And I think it's another addition we probably have to counter. Just when you thought, you might have made some progress, just know that's what they're using. But what's worrying me now is also LPG. LPG is becoming the clean cooking solution the bank and all the multilateral development banks are proposing as the sort of interim solution for people, for women especially, to move into cleaner cooking fuels. I'm not going to call it win the war on LNG. We might be fighting on two fronts now, because LPG is also slowly creeping in, and the bank is providing a lot of grants for it. So it's not debt-based financing, yes, but there's grants they're providing countries, and there's going to be the Clean Cooking Summit in Kenya later, and all the banks are talking about LPG. So that's also something we need to consider. But in sum, to in trying to conclude this, as Marge, Rob, and Fede had put it, I think the banks aren't the position of the World Bank and the IMF hasn't necessarily changed. Since the annuals, they are saying they're holding. They have to, obviously, it's like a tug of war between the US, which is the largest shareholder, versus the European, some African countries, and Asian countries as well. And interesting, Japan is supporting, as one of the other larger shareholders, it's supporting the CCAP, but it's saying it's pro upstream financing of gas. So there's that sort of challenge as well. There's a lot of these small positions that are coming from different constituencies at the World Bank. And I think for me, the concerning thing with what the speakers have talked about is this whole one World Bank group approach means through direct or indirect financing, some way or the other, they are going to be able to finance gas. And I think for us as civil society, the challenge the challenge, has, I don't want to use the word, it's opened up even further. But the point is, it's there's a silver lining with the fact that the Strait of Hormuz has caused all these issues in the supply chain, but that doesn't mean demand from these countries, especially where they have already seen projections for LNG as part of their natural resources, and they actually want to get it out of the ground. That decision hasn't changed, and that's definitely true for the African case. The only thing I'll say is this is probably the right time, and including some of the bank board and management did say this can be sort of the moment, the sort of tipping point where we can talk about renewables being cheaper and make the economic cost for renewables. So we might not win the war on LNG, but we can be able to make talk about why we should go the renewable way, why we should ensure the costs for ensuring people can actually get access to renewables becomes cheaper. So instead of Pakistan actually having taxes on for example solar panels, it should actually be incentivizing it or providing sort of subsidies. So fossil fuel import subsidies can actually provide that incentivization for renewables to come in. That is an argument some of the both at the management level and the board are talking about it. So I think I would leave it there and just say that nothing has necessarily changed post the Springs. Position remains the same. The bank won't finance anything upstream, but right now the worry is if the CCAP is not extended, then you've opened yourself up to this Pandora's box of all of the above technology as the US defines it, and that means anything can be financed. And I think Marge has said it could be nuclear because there is the joint method, the joint Paris methodology that all these MDBs have signed together, and the World Bank could look to the ADB to learn from nuclear, and that could open up and all these other sort of false solutions. So for us, yeah, we have to hold the line. We have to continuously engage and say LNG is not the solution. Thanks a lot, Fiza, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Raj. Thanks. We have to hold the line, definitely. So thank you to our speakers, Marge, Federico, Robert, and Raj, for your valuable insights. And thank you to all participants for joining us today. We look forward to continuing this conversation. Have a great day ahead.